Racism is dumb, and I don't just say that passively. I mean, it is actively dumb. Before I continue, I should preface that I am white, and I am probably not necessarily the most qualified person to speak on the topic of racism. However, there is a way that racism has affected me in a very small way. Not in the way you would think though. I have never been on the receiving end of systemic racism, and I've also never been the target of my being and my personhood because of the color of my skin. So when I say that I've been affected by racism, that's not exactly what I'm referring to. I'm gonna get into that though, because there's a lot that I really want to say about racism and broader hatred and bigotry. So let's begin with my childhood, where I was in middle school and I was getting bullied by Armenian people. I grew up in Burbank, California, and if you're not aware, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, La Crescenta, these neighborhoods are very populated with Armenian people, and particularly Glendale, which is the largest Armenian population outside of Armenia itself, because that is where a lot of Armenians refuged to after the 1915 genocide that was enacted by the Young Turks of Turkey. I grew up in this part of the LA area in the 2000s. This was after 9/11, and as you all know, 9/11 peaked an era of anti-Islam hatred. Now, granted, it is important to distinguish that Armenian people are not specifically Arabic. Although there are Arabic Armenian people, it is culturally ignorant to say that Armenians are Arabic, as Armenians are more closely related to their neighbors Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. So, at the time when I was growing up, Armenians were on the receiving end of anti-Arabic hate. It didn't matter that they weren't culturally Arabic. They were still very much so in the crosshairs of a lot of anti-Arabic hatred. And you know, this isn't the main point that I'm trying to make here, but even that in and of itself is really stupid, because this is a hatred of a people whom the people that they are claiming to hate, they don't even understand them at a basic cultural level. So you hate them, but you don't even know the people which you hate. That is absolutely dumb right off the bat. And I didn't even have to try to dissect that. That one just handed itself right to me. But I've grown into the type of person to where if I don't culturally understand something, I'm more curious about it rather than outright rejecting it. If I see food that looks different than anything I've ever had before, I'm gonna be more curious about trying that food rather than being grossed out by it. And you know what? Yeah, I have been trying more foods that I haven't had before. Recently I had chicken tikka masala. I've also had butter chicken. They're not the same thing. And I've been eating a lot more curry. And honestly, my life has been better for it. But okay, back to what I'm trying to say here. You can already see that being racist literally closes your mind off to understanding the world around you. So just at a basic level, on that front alone, racism is dumb. But okay, what's the main point I'm trying to get here? Well, growing up, I was bullied. And honestly, being bullied as a teenager in the 2000s in a largely Armenian populated community, you start to ask questions. Why am I being on the receiving end of, being bullied? Well, at first, it was because I was on the autism spectrum and I'm hard of hearing. And I know this specifically because this was what they were bullying me for. This was what they would get at me for. They would use slurs and make fun of my hearing loss. But we need to understand something. Bullying is not something that is uniquely Armenian. People bully all the time. I have not been exclusively bullied by Armenian people. But I eventually became racist towards Armenian people. And this was the basis for my hatred. You see, my mother dated this man whom I am going to call Brad, because that's not his name, and I don't care to actually say his name out loud. But Brad was a racist, and he also very much hated Armenian people. He also hated black people and the Jews, but that's not what we're focusing on here. Big fan of the band Pantera, by the way. But sometimes I would vent to him and be like, damn, I'm being bullied at school, I really hate it, I wish I wasn't being bullied, I wish people would just understand that I just need a little bit more patience and things like that. And he would come at me with being like, are they Armenian? And I'd be like, I don't know, maybe. Because remember, I didn't know about Armenians back then. But he got me at a time to where I was primed to be able to learn about Armenians for the first time, and that my exposure to Armenian culture would be from him because he was the person that was in my life. And so he started feeding me all of these horrible ideas about Armenians, which I'm not going to regurgitate here because they're all really bad. They all go along the lines of stereotypes and exaggerated features of real Armenians. This would be a way for him to instill ideas into my head as to who Armenians were. And of course, none of them were depictions that were favorable towards Armenians, but more importantly, it would stifle any amount of curiosity that I had about Armenian people and their culture. So I started to adopt all of these beliefs about Armenian people. And what did all of this do for me? Did the bullying stop? Hell no, it didn't. It actually got worse, because when I went back to school and I started regurgitating these racist beliefs, you wanna know what happened? The bullying got worse, because then these people who were bullying me saw me not just as an autistic person or a deaf person, but also as a racist, autistic, deaf person. So now, this person's not just an R-word, this person is now a racist. And of course, none of this is to justify the bullying that they had initially given to me or anything like that, but it is to say that being racist back towards them, in their eyes, only further legitimized their bullying towards me. So ultimately, racism served as a cycle of hatred in an already existing pool of hatred. If anything, it made hatred even more fervent. It fueled the flames. This is what I'm talking about when I say I've been affected by racism. Not that I was on the receiving end of racism, but that racism only seemed to make my circumstances at the time in middle school far worse than they actually were. And much less, racism was used as an explanation for why I should retaliate in the way that I did. But you want to know what? It never fixed the problem. It never addressed that these people were being ableist towards me. These people were not understanding that I had struggles of my own. And the struggles that I've highlighted that I went through, they were never rooted in racism. They were rooted in my mental development and my hearing loss. It is its own set of struggles that has its own set of bigotry and hatred that attacks it at a regular basis, and admittedly, even its own set of systemic struggles. So then, it would make sense to rationalize, as an adult at least, or at least as somebody who knows better, that reciprocating bigotry doesn't seem to stop bigotry, now does it? And of course, just to re-emphasize, none of this is to justify the bullying that I've received. None of this is to say that it was okay for the bullies to attack me, to physically assault me, to dehumanize me, and to call me names. None of this is to legitimize what they did, but it is to say that the way that I responded towards them did not help my case at all. And you want to know something else? It goes deeper than that. Because when I think about my racism towards Armenians back in the 2000s and how that did not help my case at all whatsoever, and if anything, only further perpetuated the bullying that I received, I think of this on a much bigger scale. Let's talk about like anti-Semitism, but more specifically, hatred against Jews. Jews are often considered to be the big bad evil when it comes to a lot of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. including this idea that Jews control everything, that Jews control the banks, and that Jews control the media, that Jews control the government, that Jews control this and that therefore they're pulling the strings, and that the only solution to solving this problem is anti-Semitic hatred and anti-Semitic violence. This is an idea that is perpetuated not just by anti-Semites, but also white supremacists, people who believe that white people are the master race and that we need to fight off all of these other evils, including Jews, in order to protect the white race or something. But okay, I just said a lot. Let's break it all down. First of all, it is important to recognize that this is all fake. This is all lies, right? Because sure, there are Jewish billionaires, but there are a lot of Christian billionaires, and more of them as well. If anything, you could actually make a solid case claiming that all of these anti-Jewish conspiracy theories can be better made against Christians. But Christians are the dominant religion. Christians have the most people in their membership. Christians, if anything, are not the ones pulling the strings all the time. Because truthfully speaking, when we look at the ruling class and all of the horrible things that the ruling class does, like manipulate people through the media, get us involved in wars, and perpetuating the profit of weapons manufacturers, cutting off wages, lobbying so that evil politicians screw over the working class on a regular basis, these plutocratic scumbags are not unifyingly Jewish. They're not even unifyingly Christian. And that's because people are complex, whether you like to acknowledge it or not. So then the more rational yet less sensational and attractive answer to this broader systemic problem of the ruling class screwing over the poor is that it's really a class antagonism between the rich and the poor. Not the Jews and the people, or the Christians and the people, or the Armenians and the people, or the black people and the people, or the LGBTQ community and the people, or the communists and the people, or the feminists and the people. Each new scapegoat, from the Red Scare to the anti-woke, we need to recognize that these are all distractions and that they perpetuate all of these systemic issues that are all rooted in capitalism. So let's talk about policies that are getting passed, like the big fucking ugly bill, that are giving tax breaks to the rich and screwing over the poor. In theory and on paper, it's supposed to attack the so-called welfare cheat. So what does that do? Now that we've attacked the welfare cheat, are things going to get better? Well, as of August of 2025, the Donald Trump administration has implemented numerous tariffs that have only increased the cost of imported goods. And with this big fucking ugly bill, we're going to see that people are not going to be able to afford these imported goods. Not just from the tariff increase, but also specifically from the fact that many people are not going to have an income. And Donald Trump also fired the head of the Board of Labor Statistics because she put out a report saying that job increases and job availability had stalled. Granted, this was a report about July 2025, and that the labor increase really didn't go up by that much, but still, we're seeing a massive decline, especially in the month of April and May, where they were at an all-time low when all of these things were being implemented for the first time. Job availability has not really increased because of these policies. If anything, it has only made workers far more vulnerable to being unhoused, and of course, with these new policies of Donald Trump implementing concentration camps for the homeless, yeah, we're seeing an age where people are being screwed over routinely by the ruling class, by the rich, the billionaire class, the plutocrats, instead of the mythologized welfare cheats. So racism, what did that do here? It does not explain all of the roots of these issues. If anything, it gives a fake solution, a fake target to very real issues. And if anything, it is dumb. It actually is very insulting to people's intelligence when you try to identify the problem as other people that we share a planet with. Yet billionaires like to fund all of these think tanks like PragerU and Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck, and they all perpetuate these very anti-Semitic and very racist conspiracy theories. And I have to remind you, yeah, all of them are funded by billionaires. They manufacture consent for you so that you don't question the fact that billionaires are pulling the strings, because if Rush Limbaugh had ever said, oh, the billionaires are the ones who are pulling the strings here, the billionaires would not keep funding him. All of that Rupert Murdoch money would not keep coming in. No, you would see no more Rush Limbaugh. And yes, I know Rush Limbaugh is dead. He can go rust in hell. But using a more alive and contemporary example like Glenn Beck, who once went to Poland and saw a group of Boy Scouts over there and referred to them as Hitler Youth. Yes, that's a thing he really did. It is easier for him to just blame all these different marginalized scapegoats than it is for him to punch upward and to dissect the systemic issues that we exhibit today. To be a racist, it does not require much thought. It requires emotional manipulation. It requires somebody like Brad, my mother's ex-boyfriend, to take somebody who is exhibiting real systemic issues and to give them an explanation that just sounds attractive, something that is simple to explain. You're being bullied because of your autism and your hard of hearing? Well, that's because they are Armenians. And don't you know that Armenians are evil? It's that easy to explain. It's much easier to explain than the fact that we have had a society that routinely marginalizes and institutionalizes people with autism and people with hearing loss and the deaf community. It is simpler to do that because it doesn't require you punching upward. It requires you punching downward. And in a lot of cases, at each other. It is a divide and conquer method for the ruling class. And you want to know what's sad is that a lot of times we're not equipped with all of these materialist explanations I have just gone over in this video. And honestly, it only perpetuates the racism and bigotry that we see because people are not given the tools necessary to be able to identify, hey, yeah, it's not the welfare chiefs, it's the billionaires who have a profit incentive. It's not black people, it's the colonizers who want to expand their land territory. It's not Armenians, it's our plutocratic government who continues to cut funding for services for disabled people. We need to recognize that racism is dumb. And I mean like real dumb. It is like unintelligent. It actually stifles intelligence, critical thinking, and major problem solving. And that's on top of all of the horrible things that racism does to other people, including but not limited to violence and rapings and pillagings and the justification of settler colonialism and genocide, all of these horrible things that further dehumanize all of these marginalized people. And for the ruling class, racism is a win-win weapon of mass destruction for them. Because on the one hand, it extremely harms the people which they absolutely resent. But on the other hand, they gain from it. And they use you, the working class person, to further accelerate their agenda for them. And so, as we come to a close on this rant, I really want people to recognize here that we need, now more than ever, to critically think about the propaganda and the media that we are routinely fed on a regular basis here in the United States of America. We need to break the cycle, and we need to recognize that this isn't going to stop until we put our foot down and say, no, we need answers, real answers to the systemic problems that we are facing today. Not this scapegoating bullshit, No more McCarthyist panic Red Scare. No more anti-SJW. No more anti-woke. None of this shit. We want answers. And we want liberation. No more divide and conquer. Thank you.